Welcome back to episode 3 of Behind the Curtain. In this episode, we're going to explore the creation process and how we're wrapping up the end of the story. As you know from episode 1, Reckless is based on the story of Hosea from the Bible. However, if you go to the Bible and you read the story of Hosea, you'll see that it's only a few chapters long. Most of the book of Hosea is actually prophetic, and it speaks in poetry about God's relationship to Israel. That made my job a little bit more difficult when it came to developing the story for Reckless. Reckless centers on Gomer, Hosea's unfaithful wife. Because I wanted to use this story to not only talk about the redemptive love of Hosea and Gomer, but also to highlight the evils of modern-day sex trafficking, I had to do a lot of work to write the story, to make it cohesive, and to touch on all the important points that I wanted to bring to the audience. We meet Gomer at the beginning of the ballet in a train station. She's 14 years old. She's young and she doesn't have very supportive parents. She's not popular, she's not pretty. She feels alone and a little bit disjointed from the rest of society. She's met a man online. She's been texting with him back and forth for several weeks, and she's decided to accept his invitation to come to Chicago for a date. The man's name is International Blue.
In the beginning, Gomer is so excited to meet this character of International Blue. So that moment is the first time that I'm meeting him, and it's so exciting. So I think that whole sequence, that first pas we do, is the moment of both of us being like, okay, what's happening? And then at the end, I fall in love.
Later on, we find out that Blue is actually a pimp. In the beginning of Reckless, Gomer sees Blue as her boyfriend. She feels very excited and wanted and loved by this man, even though the entire thing is an act on the part of Blue. He's trying to convince Gomer that he's a great guy, that he loves her, that he's gonna offer her everything that her parents and friends have neglected. But we see throughout the course of Act 1 that Blue is totally lying. There is not one shred of truth in what he says to Gomer.
I don't want to say dramatic irony, but to Gomer, he's making all the steps, he's doing all the things, he's being there when not a lot of people have been there for her. He's treating her pretty nicely at the beginning, as opposed to some of the stuff in her backstory.
Gomer and Blue live a life of luxury, but after a few months of that, Blue turns on Gomer and demands that she pay up for the many hotels and parties and pieces of clothing that he's given her over the past few months. This storyline was inspired by an actual sex trafficking victim who had the very same thing play out in her life.
It's all bait and switch into abuse and prostitution, and right in that brothel scene, it's, I know you're gonna be here because you don't have much else. What are you gonna do for me?
Definitely one of the harder things to watch in the ballet is how long Gomer holds on to her hope that this man isn't who he's kind of become. He really is that guy I first met. He does love me, he is sweet, and kind of with each scene, he shows more and more of his true self, and Gomer spends so much time just hoping that he's going to go back to who he was when they first met. And it's very sad to kind of see how long she holds out for him, and then that sense of acceptance, where it's not the good kind of acceptance where you've moved on. It's just this is my life, this is all I am, this is all I'm worth. And it's very hard to watch her get that low. It does make her meeting Hosea that much more meaningful, that much more beautiful.
From there, we start to see the aspects of him becoming more controlling, overprotective, more of that toxicity that's involved with it as the storyline progresses. I think it's seen in glimpses of smaller pas, and then him stripping away at the intellect and subconscious is a really big, clear moment.
Gomer finally sees Blue for who he is. She sees him abusing other people in the brothel. She experiences Blue providing drugs to herself and other prostitutes in order to keep them captive. She's not chained to a bed or locked inside of a room, but she's very much captive through substance abuse and emotional abuse.
what happens to Gomer can really happen to anyone. I think there's a lot of misconceptions of how that happens, but it is kind of a gradual process and a gradual taking things away, a gradual numbing. And so I think being able to kind of see those things play out before you, that it's not just, she went from normal girl going to school straight into the, prostitution, that it is something that happens over time and something that involves not just a one-time choice, but a repeated slow choice and slowly walking down into this.
We also meet Hosea in Act 1. At first, we just see Hosea passing Gomer on the subway. They connect, they see each other, but they're not too concerned about the other person. It's kind of like you or I passing by a stranger. They seem kind and friendly, but they're not somebody that we would really stop to talk to because we're on our way to work. Over time, though, Hosea and Gomer bump into each other quite a few times. Finally, Hosea gets a message from God. He feels compelled to go over to Gomer when he sees her working the street corners one night. He tenderly wraps Gomer in his coat and asks her if she'd like a bite to eat. That's the beginning of the miraculous redemptive love that Hosea has for Gomer.
End of Act 1, Hosea comes in, and it was just like a really joyous moment for everyone. We're all like, oh my goodness, finally something good is happening to this girl.
Yeah.
And the chorus is having kind of a voice of being like, hey, like you can turn this around, like you should trust this guy. We're trying to get Gomer to come back to the light and not be stuck in that dark place where she is.
At the end of Act 1, we see Gomer and Hosea beginning a relationship. And Act 2 opens with them getting to know each other and getting married.
The opening of Act 2, I would say, is one of my favorite parts of the ballet, where it starts with a time lapse showing sort of right after Gomer and Hosea met, where then he's taking her out of that life of sex trafficking and helping her find a safe place. And then all the way through to their marriage and then their first child. And that whole, it's sort of a 15-minute segment, and it's just such a joy because you get to see sort of these happy moments done back to back to back to back, and lots of fun partnering, and that's been a highlight for me.
Yeah, that's been a real breath of fresh air, I think, for the whole company, being able to have a break from the first act and then heading into the second act, getting to see this new life that she's been given with Hosea, and just the contrast between her life in the first act with International Blue and then her life with Hosea, and how starkly different they are, and how even like the way that Gomer holds herself is so much more different in the beginning of the second act, because she's in a better place and in a healthier place.
However, as you may have guessed, the marriage doesn't stay happy for long. Even though children are a blessing and married life is a wonderful privilege, over time, Gomer grows weary of having to cook and clean and constantly provide care for her child and her husband. Tasks that seem like fun to many people or seem to be a part of life for somebody who's had a normal childhood, for Gomer feel like a burden. She feels trapped. She remembers her days trapped in the brothel, and in a way she feels that this is the same. This is not a normal line of thought. Gomer is so unhealthy from all that she's experienced that she superimposes negative things on Hosea. I've seen that play out in my own life, even if it's not to that extreme. Sometimes the people who love us most are the people that we end up lashing out at. She starts to remember the good parts of her life on the streets, the parts that she enjoyed, the parts that felt a little bit glamorous. She leaves Hosea and her young baby, and she heads back to Chicago. While she's on the streets, Gomer starts to feel a little bit of remorse. She starts to recognize that her decision is impacting her marriage and her life in a terrible way. Her beloved husband, Hosea, searches the streets frantically. Gomer has no idea that he's looking for her, but he continues to search. He sees many different prostitutes on the streets and checks in every alleyway and brothel that he can find. Finally, Hosea uncovers his beloved wife working the street corners yet again. He's hurt, and rightfully so. He struggles with, should I even be married to Gomer at this point? His internal dialogue tells him that maybe he should run the other direction. But then he remembers that this is how God loves each of us, and he brings that love to his wife in the most spectacular way. He takes Gomer back yet again, and Gomer makes the right decision this time. Instead of running from Hosea and from that love, she decides to go back with her husband. She makes a decision to choose love, to choose companionship, to choose good over choosing things that ultimately lead to her demise.
As dark as the story gets, it's so that we can show the contrast between that and the light and the love from Hosea.
It's an incredible story. It's one that I hope will resonate with each of us. Even if we haven't seen our lives go to that dramatic point, we have all had moments where we've turned away from what is good for us and chosen things that are detrimental. We can all relate with Gomer's story on one level or another. Hosea's story is also relatable. We have hard people in our lives, people that we don't want to love, people that make us feel like we're not doing enough, people that reject us time and time again. But the point of the story is that God never gives up, and neither should we. We've already been in the theater a few times working on lighting and stage components. The performance is going to be a beautiful cacophony of dance, music, lighting, and projection. We've even started booking the show for next year's touring season. If you'd like more information, please visit ballet58.org/reckless. Innovative art takes a lot of work. From the dancers to the production team to myself as the choreographer, it's incredible to see the entire thing come together. It's hard to believe that it's only 3 weeks until the premiere of Reckless. Tickets are already 50% sold out, and we would love to have you join us if you're in or near Chicago. Part of the proceeds from this first performance are going to Refuge for Women Chicago to support the ministry that they have helping women out of a life of sex trafficking.